All right, last thing we have to do with this login form is show a spinner to our user. So I'm sure that feels familiar, and it might feel like, gee whiz, Stephen, we're doing a lot of the same stuff twice over. But to be honest with you, I'm really happy that we ended up rebuilding the login form with Redux after doing it with React. It really helps you get a feel for how each library behaves. Anyways, back to the task at hand. Showing a spinner on our login form is going to be something I would kind of call, deceptively simple. In other words, we really don't need to overthink this thing. As soon as our login user action creator is called, we will want to dispatch an action that somehow says, hey, start the spinner up, please. And then whenever we see a success or failure type come along, that means, okay, well, the authentication request is complete. We should resolve the spinner, or excuse me, we should turn off that loading flag and not show the spinner anymore. So we're just going to depend upon the login success, login user fail, and a new action type that we'll dispatch called login user to figure out when the spinner should be running. So let's give this a shot. We'll start off by defining a new type inside of our types file. So in my types file, I'm going to add on export const login user. So I hope that you're getting a reasonable sense of the different action types that I might create for any type of AJAX request or any type of long-running request that might fail. I'll generally start off with just login user, or kind of whatever the very base action is, whatever I'm about to start. And then for the success case and fail case, I'll add on two additional types that just append success and fail. And so that makes it really easy for me to understand, like, okay, these are all related to logging in the user and the different states that are associated with it each. If I was going to make any change here whatsoever, I might do something like, maybe start, maybe. That definitely makes sense. It's really up to personal preference whether or not you want to be really explicit about this first kind of starting action type here. So totally up to you. I could definitely see a case for putting on like login user start there. All right, back over my action creator. Here's login user. I'm going to immediately dispatch an action of type login user whenever this action creator is called. So we'll call dispatch with an action of type login user. Now we still need to import this. We don't have the type inside this file just yet, so I will scroll back up to the top and I'll make sure that I also include this actions type at the top in the import statement. Okay, so now this is really starting to meet our requirements. The instant that we try to log a user in, we're going to dispatch an action of type login user. Then whenever the request succeeds or fails, we will dispatch the success or fail action as well. One thing I really want to point out in particular is that we are going to use this login user type right here to start our spinner. And so you might be a little bit tempted to do something like, an action of type start spinner or something like that. And I would really encourage you not to go down that path. The reason for which is that at some future point in time, when you are coming back to this code after some long break or whatever it might be, and you see a action of type like start spinner, well, you don't quite know when that thing is going to be dispatched, right? You don't really quite know by just looking at the action's name. You know what it might do. It gives you a reasonable idea that it's going to start up the spinner, but you don't really know when it's going to be dispatched. So it's something like login user. It's very clear. Okay, this is going to be dispatched whenever I'm about to log in the user. Very clear. What it does is a little bit more of a mystery, but I would rather have to figure that out than have to figure out when the thing gets called. All right, so now we can flip over to our reducer. I'm going to pull in my login user type, and then we'll add on another case statement to handle this type. So case login user. So now inside of here, I want to take all of my existing state, and I'm going to want to set the loading flag to true. So we don't have one just yet. Let's initialize this property. Again, we don't have to do this. I'm choosing to do it so that any engineer in the future is going to have a reasonable idea of what all the different pieces of state are inside this reducer. So now we've got login user of loading true. Another thing that I'm going to decide to put in here, and this is kind of, I'm just thinking ahead for my for my program, for my app here, chances are that whenever I start up the login process, if there's any existing error message, I might want to zero that out as well. I might want to clear out the error message. And this makes a lot of sense because if I attempt to log in once and I fail, and then I say change my password again and I hit login again, I want the user to understand that okay, yes, we understand that you are trying to log in again. We will clear that error message because otherwise they're going to think that your app is just doing nothing whatsoever. All right, so now we're going to get this loading true flag. We will also make sure that we clear loading true whenever we hit the success case or the fail case. So whenever we hit success, I'm going to flip loading to false. And whenever we hit the fail case, I'm also going to change loading to false as well. Now this line right here is getting a little bit long, so if you want to do some new line characters in here, that's totally fine. I think I'm just going to let it kind of hang out for a little bit. Okay, so we've got our loading flag right now, and we are properly toggling it from true to false between all of our different states. Let's flip over to our login form. So here's my login form. I'm now going to add that loading flag to my map state to props function, and then we're going to place the button inside the login form along with the spinner. So I'll scroll down to the bottom, find my map state to props. Here's where we pull all of our properties off the auth state object. So I'll also pull in this new loading flag that we're maintaining, and I'll make sure that I pass that down to the component as well. Next, at the very top, I will import my spinner from my common components. Remember, this is one of those components that we've made and pulled through from project to project. And then inside of my render method, I'm going to find the button. All right, here it is right here. And we want to move this button to a helper method where we're going to say, instead of always showing this button right here, we will call the helper method and decide whether or not we want to show the button or the spinner, depending on that loading flag. So this should feel pretty familiar because we did it once already in the auth project. So we'll say this.render button, and we're going to take the same exact approach here. And I'm going to cut this button tag right here. Let's cut it out. And then we'll define render button as a helper method. So render button. Then if this.props.loading, so if we are loading, return early and show a spinner. And I want it to be of size large. Otherwise, we can return that bit of button JSX that we just cut out. So there we go. I got my render button. If we're loading, show the spinner. Otherwise, show our button. Cool. I think we're all set. I think we're ready for a test in the simulator. I'll do my refresh. And now if I put in test@test.com, and I'm going to put in a bad password to start. So I'll put in a bad password. We get the spinner. We see authentication failed. The password goes away because we want to clear that password out so the user kind of doesn't keep on just trying to say, oh, maybe it was that very classic, password 1. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, 2, 3, whatever, that type of kind of funky situation. So let's now log in appropriately. Now the instant that I attempt to log in here, I'm going to expect to see the error message go away. I'm going to expect to see a spinner start up. And then I'm going to expect to see this button come back when loading is all complete. There we go, just what we expected. Now again, this is a situation where we don't really have to flip the spinner back to a button that much, right? Because in theory, when a user loads or logs in successfully, we're going to redirect them away from this form to some type of logged in page inside our app. Nonetheless, I think it's really good practice just to make sure that you kind of reset all of your form attributes before something gets a little bit messy or dirty. Speaking of which, one more thing that I want to point out here, speaking of resetting form attributes, I'm not going to do this because we're not going to really have a logout feature in this app. We covered it earlier in the authentication app, so I've got a reasonable belief that you know how to put the logout functionality together yourself. But one thing I want to point out is that if for some reason we navigate away from the screen and then come back to it, right? And we're going to be covering navigation here very shortly. The values of these inputs are stored in the reducer, right? That's where they're stored. So if I go away from this form and then come back to it, those values are still going to be in the reducer. And so I would see, if I came back to this form right here, I would see an email and password still in the form, which is really not expected behavior at all. So one way that I might choose to solve this is to flip over to my auth reducer, and I could say in here, hey, whenever someone successfully logs in, So let's put some new lines in here. Whenever someone successfully logs in, that's great. We've got their user model now, but I don't want to have like that stored or kind of cached email and password in the form anymore. So I might choose to also reset the email and the password like so. So now if someone navigates away from the form and comes back to it, they won't see their email and password pre-filled in there. Now, the one thing I want to point out now is that if you look at the signature of this return statement right here, we are essentially redefining every single property on our state object, right? We've got like ... state, which might have an error, loading, email, whatever. It has all that stuff on there, but we're resetting all of it right here. So I think we might be able to actually clean this up a little bit. I'm going to remove all of those extra attributes. I'm going to condense it down to just ... state and user, and then I will also spread in, here's the tricky part, initial state. So I'll say take all of our existing state, whatever it might be, who knows, maybe we add in some additional properties in the future and we don't reflect them in initial state. This initial ... state right here is kind of just future proofing this for ourselves. Then reset all of state in our reducer, and then on top of that, throw in our user model as well. So let's see how this works now. It'll be our last test. I know this is turning into a long section, but I really just wanted to add in this last thing in here. So now if I do 1, 2, 3, I'm going to see my error message. But if I hit password, when I log in successfully, perfect. The form resets. I go back to no spinner, no error message. Everything is back to just very empty. And so if a user ever comes back to this form, they're not going to see the pre-filled email and password. Okay, really long section. I think we're all done here. Let's continue the next section. I think we're ready to move on to navigation.